Hello and welcome to the Women Writers Festival. This is the world's largest traveling festival, putting the spotlight on women writers across genre, across country, across languages. At the Women Writers Festival, today the spotlight is on an author who has been perhaps the final word many times on the Indian film industry. With nearly 30 to 40 years of experience of covering what's happening behind the scenes and in the front of it, Anupama Chopra has built a serious body of work. She's out with a brand new book after many years. And today we're going to talk to her about how she looks back at the big change in India's film industry that has also changed the size of the screen it loves to watch itself on. Welcome to the show, Anupama. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, first of all, for having me back on your platform. It's You guys are doing such terrific work, and it's always lovely to speak to you.
So tell us more about the book. How has this journey been? How is this book stacking up differently from the past books you've done?
For me, you're right. I do come into this space of cinema and especially Bollywood from many different angles. Uh, but I think all of the angles kind of speak to my love for the movies. So it all converges in a sense. And the idea was really not at all to write a biography, because I genuinely don't think anybody cares about my life, as they should not. But it was just to, because when you work 20-25 years, uh, you see an evolution, and that kind of sort of overarching view is something that I think is not you don't see it a lot. There's not too many people who kind of keep doing this over, and who've been here since the early 90s, still reviewing films, still. So I'm literally now interviewing the children of the people I started out interviewing. Which is great, I think. But I felt like if I could talk about films and people and events that I have loved and that have really kindled joy in me, and also use that as a way to kind of see into other areas and tell stories that I have seen, the things I have experienced. And the film industry has changed so drastically that now, when I describe to you what it was like in the early 90s, it's you probably won't be, you won't be able to relate to it at all. It's so unimaginable that that actually existed.
You mentioned other areas. What other areas have you addressed in your book?
What the actual industry was like. What it was like to be a female reporter in the early 90s, when I would be on film sets with like the heroine and the heroine's mom and a hairdresser, and that was it. And there would be like five women on a set with 200 people, and none of us was sort of questioning this. It was what it was. So it's things like that I've seen change so drastically. The attitude, the way films are made, the artists, the also, I think one of the most gratifying things really has been to see how much women have, emerged and kind of come into the forefront. I mean, we have miles to go before we sleep, uh, but it's such a radical shift from where it was when I began.
How has the female character changed? How has the female factor changed? Not even the character, front of the screen, behind the scenes. How has that changed for women?
Look, they've always been very successful female artists. There've always been a few female directors who made, who created iconic films. I mean, like a Sai Paranjape, who did really groundbreaking work 40 years ago. So you've always had that. You've always had very successful um, female actors, right? The leading ladies who've been such an integral part of the oversized fantasy that Hindi cinema traditionally sold, right? But what I've seen in the last decade is there is a shift in the box office, right? And you have to understand that, of course, this is pre-pandemic. Nobody could have seen the pandemic coming, but uh, in industries worldwide, major sort of shifts happen because the box office responds in a certain way. And for me, I think the first time I saw things actually move was with The Dirty Picture, Vidya Balan's film, which was the first film to do that, first contemporary film to do that kind of money. And that was frontlined by a woman. It was a woman's story. And I saw the way things shifted post that. And then you, of course, had a slew of movies. You had Razi with Alia Bhatt that also made, I think it crossed like 100 crore. So, the minute the money started to make sense, the position of women started to shift. And that coincided, I think, with the arrival of a new generation of artists, women who weren't afraid to speak their mind, who would not mince words in an interview about not having pay parity, not getting an equal hotel room. I mean, this is a conversation I had with Anushka, I think about 4 or 5 years ago. And she said to me on a location, the hero will get the better room. And that's the way it is. And now these are things women did not speak about. The women who had power, uh, probably did not want to rock the boat very much because it was and still continues to be very, very male centric. It is run by men. But I think I've seen these shifts happen in the last 10 years where women are very, very open. Actors like Deepika Padukone or Anushka, the A-list, Priyanka Chopra, they will say it, they will speak it. And I think that makes a massive difference. And of course, now you have women in every line of filmmaking, including sort of cinematography, which is traditionally such a male world.
So, Anupama, what has shifted? How have women decided that today they're going to speak up? What has helped them get the guts to ask for what they must have, and sort of claim the space that they very much so deserve?
It is women who've grown up with a different set of expectations, with a different inputs into their lives, with a different level of education, perhaps. Women who are vocal about the way it is. And I remember Anushka telling me that in the beginning, when she would bring up things, when she wanted things uh, in a certain way, she said people would say to her, "Oh, you're such an activist," uh, meaning like you're just a troublemaker, right? But that was fine. I mean, here's an artist who became a producer in her 20s because she wanted to control the creative. And those kind of things are very, very heartening. And I think that was one of the sort of also kind of pivotal changes. When she produced NH10, she created that role for herself. She enabled that film to happen. And now I think almost every other leading lady has her own, actor has her own production house, including
Exactly.
Tapsi. I think, what is it called? Outsider or something. I can't remember now,
Yeah.
but it's a very provocative name that she's given her production house, and good for her. And I think these are all wonderful sort of baby steps into the right direction.
Has the perception of women changed in the world today? There was this fetish for Indian elements to the larger story in the past. It's no longer the case. And in fact, Indian women have led India's international story when it comes to the film industry in the recent past, whether it's Priyanka Chopra or many others. What have you talked about around that in your book?
Well, I've addressed that in the entry on Priyanka. There is a chapter on her, and I think that it's very interesting how it's the women who've actually kind of done this. And I asked Priyanka this, and I said, like, it's you and it's Deepika and it's even before them it was Aishwarya, who and whatever little they did a couple of films. Of course, Priyanka's done a lot more. Uh, but it was the women who took that, uh, and I imagine it's a fairly sort of, you have to flatten your ego out. It's a fairly tough spot to put yourself into because you begin as a newcomer again. I mean, when I've interviewed Priyanka, she's always talked about how she had to be back in rooms where she had to say, "Hi, I'm Priyanka Chopra," after being a sort of household name for South Asians everywhere. And I remember asking her this, that how is it that only the women have been able to do this, and not so much the men? Uh, and she was like, I don't know, maybe women are sort of more willing to take the risk. Maybe I think also that kind of superstardom that men, at least the leading, the four or five sort of A-listers of Bollywood are in, makes it very hard for them to kind of, put themselves out on a limb again. Maybe they're just not in that space. So I think all credit to the women who've kind of gone and put themselves in vulnerable positions again, as kind of quote unquote artists and brands, because you could fail, and the whole world is watching. All of us are always, I think India takes great sort of pride when somebody succeeds, but also it's very very can be very hurtful when somebody fails. So to me it's amazing that the women have made those strides.
So, are you saying with all of this change, have we moved away from the Khans? Is that a chapter that's done for Bollywood? Or it's still very much going to make a comeback?
I don't think we've moved away from the sort of holy trinity of Amir, Salman, and Shah Rukh very much. It is a brave new world, especially in the last 2 years. I think streaming has thrown up actors and created its own star system, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing, because the gatekeepers, um, there were too few slots, and I think it's amazing that we have stars who don't necessarily fit into that very narrow definition of what a Bollywood star can be. But are the Khans in any way irrelevant? I don't think so. When you work that long and each one of them has been at it for 25, 28, 30 years, you don't you don't fade away because you don't have a release or three films flop. It doesn't work like that. um, they are like, they speak across the country. They speak to the single screens, they speak to the multiplexes, they speak to the south, they speak to the north. And I think that I'm not even sure that you're going to have that kind of stardom again, because we live in a different world now. But I think they're very much there.
Why did you say it's a brave new world? What's prompting you to say that?
Look, it's a very exciting time for me as a critic, as a voracious lover of films and storytelling, because it's brave, because some of the stories you're seeing are stories that you wouldn't have seen earlier, because streaming allows for it, even though, of course, in the last year, censorship has reared up its not so attractive head, and there is a huge amount of even self censorship happening in the business now. And yet you do get stories that are more, that take bigger risks, that give women more to do. I mean, just I was just thinking the other day, look at the fact that you've got Sushmita Sen in Arya, you've got Lara Datta in Hookups and Hiccups, you've got Ravina Tandon in Aranyak, and these were all women who've been working for 30 years and had reached a point where Hindi cinema, frankly, didn't know what to do with them. And streaming has given them these incredible roles, has taken them into households across the country. So for me, there is an aspect of bravery there, and it's new, it's exciting. And I think, there's this whole sort of gloom and doom about, is theatrical over, are we done? And no, theatrical is never going to be done. um, there is a there is a magic to the communal experience that your living room will never replicate, no matter how big your TV is and no matter what surround sound you've got in your living room. So it's never going to be over, but you have choices. We as viewers have so many choices, and that's what is so thrilling about the time we live in.
What is so powerful about content today?
I love the storytelling. Like, I really, really enjoyed Scam. I love watching the rise of Pratik, who played Harshad so well. Um, I love the fact that you can have ideas and narratives which perhaps you wouldn't be able to. I mean, look at my favorite Hindi film of last year was Neeraj Gaiwan's Gili Puchi. And where would that go if you didn't have streaming? Where would you see that? Where would a director say, okay, I'm going to create this specific story of a protagonist who is queer, who is Dalit, who is a blue collar worker in a factory, and I'm going to tell her the story of her life and this relationship that she sort of has with somebody else. I mean, to me, it's just it's so exciting that these platforms now exist and that filmmakers have the space. Even something like Gehraiya. Of course, I haven't seen the film. We've all just watched the promo, and I was thinking, here's a film that seems to be in English. They're talking a lot in English. It's about infidelity, but it's not. Uh, at least from what I can tell in the trailer, not at all propagating the Janam Janmantar Ka Pyar that Hindi cinema has sold for decades. It's showing us imperfect people making hurtful choices, which is great. So for me, I those are very exciting things, and genuinely one of the happiest things of my life in the last 2 years has been to discover cinemas beyond Bollywood. To really, and that
Yes,
has only
me
been
too.
possible because of streaming. I would not, even though many Malayalam films release in Mumbai, especially Tamil films release in Mumbai, but you're so caught up with your life and your world, and you're trying to discover Bollywood that you would never ever make the effort to go out, apart from like the Bahubalis of the world, right? And here you are, and you can watch these in your home. And for me, that's just been magical. It's sustained me.
Let's get back to your writing process. What is it? What is the routine? How do you approach your writing? Tell us a little more about that.
It's very hard. It's very hard. I wrote this book after years. I mean, the last book I wrote was, I would say, the book on Shahrukh, yeah, which was 2008. The books that have come in between have mostly been compilations of my interviews and my previous work, so they're not necessarily books I've written. Um, so for me, this was really after 7 years of being a digital first journalist, of running Film Companion. It was really a way to kind of work a different muscle, which is what I think books do. They work a different muscle, and you have to sort of learn to be patient again. There's no instant gratification here. There's it's a lonely job. You're just sitting in front of that blank screen and hoping the words will come. So for me, it's I write in the mornings. I'm an early riser, and that's like the first 2 hours between about 6 and 8 is where I get my best work done, just in terms of writing.
So I got the answer to the how, but I want the answer to the why. Why does Anupama Chopra write books, given that you are already, dabbling in so many elements of the written word and constantly watching the film industry from such close quarters?
Because I think books have a longevity that short form video, Instagram, just simply doesn't. And I think that they really hone your craft. For me, I can see the improvement in my own writing, my own ability to approach film, my own ability to construct an argument for how I feel about a film before and after writing the book. Because when you sit down with whatever 40 plus movies and you rewatch and you analyze, it just helps you to be better at what you do. And that's ultimately what drives me. I want to, I feel there is so much to learn. There is such a long way to go in terms of just being able to review and critique and talk about cinema. That for me, this was one step to kind of hone my own skills.
Anupama Chopra, it's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us, and all the best with this book.
Thank you so much.
All right. There's a great deal lined up here at the Women Writers Festival. Edition after edition, we bring you new themes. We talk to authors about their writing process and, of course, about the very fascinating and interesting books in fiction and non-fiction that they're putting together. Stay tuned with us as we kick off the first edition of the Women Writers Fest for 2022, but have plenty more lined up for you as we pass through this year with some sense of hope an excitement that after all, we will keep the pandemic behind us and explore the written and the creative world